Hey, typology friends, welcome back to the podcast on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm joined by my friend, producer, confrere, Anthony Skinner, and joined by our guest, Enneagram author of the new book, Good Soil, The Education of an Accidental Farmhand, Jeff Chu. Welcome back to Typology.
It's good to be with you, Ian.
All right, so Jeff, I'm stoked to talk to you for two reasons. One is we don't get that many Enneagram Sixes on the show. They are hard to find in the wild.
Allegedly, there are a lot of us out there. I haven't encountered that many sixes either, but I've heard people make the claim that there are lots of us.
You know, I'm beginning to maybe side with you. There is this belief among some Enneagram teachers that there are more Enneagram Sixes in the population than in the other type, and nines second, and that you see. I think, all right, I'm just going to talk anecdotally here. This is all speculation. I do meet a lot of nines. I meet a ton of nines.
Yes.
Okay. I seem to meet more nines than I meet sixes, but that is sort of, you're right. That is sort of common thinking that there are more sixes than any other type. But in your experience, not the case.
Maybe we're all hiding from you in fear. I don't know.
Maybe that's it. Maybe you're hiding behind other types.
Maybe.
To prevent yourself from standing out and becoming exposed to the possibility of danger and bad things happening to you. The other reason I'm excited to have you on, because this new memoir I'm really, really excited about, because I do have this crazy fantasy about farm life. Now, let me just sort of tell you what it is. I know that it's common. I know this is a common fantasy. However, I watch, like, for example, This Farming Life.
Okay.
Have you watched that show, This Farming Life?
I've seen little bits. I haven't sat through.
Clarkson's Farm.
So you want to be a gentleman farmer?
I don't know. I think I'd like to pay somebody. I like to live on a farm that I own that somebody else farms, and I could wander around and pretend like I actually had my hands in the dirt.
You want to be a British aristocrat. You want to be landed gentry.
There you go.
I'm not
Walk
afraid.
around with your collar that you got
with
going
my
on.
collar's up like this. The only reason I cannot be British landed gentry is, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I have a terrible allergy to wool. And so anytime I get near anything, and the idea of being in wet, cold wool in wellies, I don't think so. That doesn't sound like a good time to me.
But you like the postcard picture of
I kind of grew up. Yeah, I kind of grew up in around that kind of world, actually. My dad definitely thought he was that guy, but there's something about this. There is a draw, I think, in my heart to, yes, I guess this bucolic kind of British Elgar kind of like wandering the meadows kind of experience, right? But you've actually done something here. I want to talk about the good soil, the education of an accidental farmhand, and why this is important in the conversation that we're having. You had this seemingly, you're not seeming, you had this wonderful career, and then you went off to Princeton. You take a class called Farminary.
Yep. So Princeton Seminary has a 21-acre sustainable farm called the Farminary. Yep. It is a working farm that produces vegetables and flowers for multiple families during the growing season who participate through CSAs. And it's also a classroom, because there are so many passages of scripture that have to do with agrarian life, right? So many of Jesus's parables have to do with the soil and growing things, whether it's fig trees or wheat. So one of the professors had this notion. He was a farm boy from Kansas. He had this notion that a farm would actually be an excellent classroom, getting people out of the four walls of your standard setting and getting us to dig in the dirt a little bit.
So can I ask a question here at the top? Enneagram 6 question. Obviously, with the Enneagram 6, trust and security are central themes. So there's a lot of unpredictability with farming. How did engaging in farming, what did it teach you about yourself, or even something greater than yourself?
We're also good at planning for worst case scenarios. And I felt like that was a little bit of a superpower at the farm.
Wow.
Look, my first day, I show up. I am still living in New York City. I'm still dressing like I'm in New York City. It is a hot September day in New Jersey. I am wearing khakis, a button-down long sleeve shirt, and pristine hunter boots that are just out of the box. I look like an idiot. And my professor takes us to the compost pile. That's the first place we went on the farm. And he tells us to start digging. There are rotting vegetables. There is moldy fruit. There is spinach that's basically liquefied and is splattering all over the bare legs of my classmates. Was I an overdressed fool, or was I actually secretly very smart for overdressing and protecting myself from compost goop? I ask you.
Interesting.
Who knows? But, it's so funny about sixes because, we do talk about the sixes deadly sin being fear. Anxiety might be a better term. That there is also this kind of hypervigilance, hyperpreparedness, but at the same time, going from New York City to this farm life, right, requires great courage and a sense of humor, that sixes have in spades, right? Like there's something kind of inherently contradictory about sixes, right? Because some sixes I know, despite their anxiety, do some of the most courageous, interesting things I know.
Well, we're all bundles of contradictions.
Well, for sure. But this is the obvious one with sixes.
I think there is a way in which our planning, our envisioning of different scenarios enables us to take those baby steps toward things that other folks would look at as brave. It doesn't feel brave to me to do something like this. What's brave about going to grad school? There's nothing really revolutionary about burying myself in books, but it was something where I had to imagine, okay, how am I going to get through this? A lot of my anxieties are social anxieties, right? I'm a Chinese kid. I know how to complete the assignment and complete it well. The academic side of things was never going to be a struggle. I remember driving down the New Jersey Turnpike to my first day of class, and I kept saying to myself, I don't need new friends. I don't need new friends. I'm not going back to school to make friends. And looking back, that was one way in which I was preparing myself for the scariest part of going back to school at the age of 39. I knew most of my classmates would be a lot younger than I was, many of them straight out of undergrad. And then there was a little group of second career folks who were in their 50s, 60s, even one woman in her 60s who was a marvel and a wonder. Not a lot of folks in my age range, which I knew going into it. So I said, I don't need to make friends. I prepared myself. I steeled myself. My first real friend at the Farminary was a Jack Russell Terrier. And there's something about animals that enables them to just walk right past all of the defenses that we've put up to get through life. And that Jack Russell Terrier's name was Lincoln. And his insatiable desire for meat meant that he would just trot around seeing who would be his smuggler. And I was ready to do that. So I had prepared myself for people. I hadn't put up any defenses for dogs.
Right. We were just talking about dogs the other day. We have two. And I was telling someone just the other day that I've never not had a dog since I was 21 years old. So for the last 44 years, I've never not had a dog. Or two, right? One is actually sleeping at my feet right here. And they have been my lifelong constant companions. There's not a book I've written that I did not, in the acknowledgments, acknowledge my dogs as my kind of canine muses that have sort of walked with me through a season of time, There's a lovely book that I recommend to people. Did you ever read Andrew Root's book, The Grace of Dogs?
I have not.
It's interesting. Do you know Andy?
I know who he is.
Yes. He wrote a book years ago. I don't think it sold that many copies, unfortunately, because it's kind of a charming, interesting, very five-ish book, right? About dogs and about why human beings form these strange bonds and attachments with them. And he kind of frames it out in part as an echo of Eden. There's some kind of Edenic kind of connection that he gives language to. That's really incredibly beautiful and sweet, really sweet. So talk to me about the farm or as a metaphor, like what have you learned from the agrarian life, Wendell Berry, that has been most instructive to you, spiritually speaking?
As someone who lives with a lot of fear, the farm taught me to be a little more open-hearted about the things that I can't control.
Tell me more.
So I can't control the rain. I can't control the sun. I can't control the temperature. I can show up. I can weed. I can amend the soil. I can pay attention. But I write in the book, for instance, about one spring transferring seedlings from the protected space where we had started the seeds into the raised beds where we were growing herbs. And I had looked at the temperature. I had made sure that the temperature wouldn't drop below freezing. I hadn't accounted for the wind. Even with all my planning, there were certain things that I couldn't account for. And I think I'm a little more humble about that now.
Yeah. So I love this. Anthony and I were on here just before we started, and we were just talking about anxiety, our anxiety, right? And every season of life, man, it just brings different anxieties, and I do feel like for me personally, like just in the last year, I've had this growing awareness, like, have I always been this anxious? Like this question, even though I was walking with the dogs today, this was my conversation with God. Have I always been this anxious? Like so frightened of things. And you, as someone who could probably say, yes, I have always been this anxious, right? Like this is a big thing you're describing, right? To recognize what you can control, what you can't control, and learning to let go of the things you can't control. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Especially in the times we live in now. Which are so difficult on so many levels.
Yes.
We're also being bombarded by headlines and essays and videos that are designed to capitalize on maximizing our anxiety.
Yeah.
I was at my church in North Carolina where I preach and teach a couple months ago, and we were doing a little Q&A session with the congregation. And I asked them how many of them have notifications on for news apps, New York Times, CNN. And a bunch of people raised their hands. And I said, why? Why do you have those on, and how does that make you move through the world in a healthier way? What difference does it make if you know about a world event, usually tragic or heartbreaking, an hour or two earlier? I don't think we were wired to absorb not just what's going on in the country and the world, but also the regular drumbeat of just being human. Friends who are in the hospital, folks who are struggling with their kids, a cancer diagnosis, a broken relationship, the stress of getting food on the table, the endless to-do list, whether it's chauffeuring the kids or paying the bills or getting the groceries. There's just too much.
Listen, man, I am with you. I do not have notifications set on my phone. I got rid of my New York Times subscription because I could not stand getting up every day. And of course, even the New York Times, which has a pretty good journalism, right? Like even their headlines are designed like clickbait, and they're all so dark. And there's the air of pessimism and the air of, it's not even cynicism. It's kind of like borderline constant despair.
The attention economy does not care about our spiritual and emotional well-being.
No, it does not. It does not. And I've gotten rid of the New York Times, except for spelling bee, which I have kind of an addiction to. But
Wordle and connections.
Connections
Wordle and connections.
Wordle and connections, yeah. That's all the good the New York Times has come to from me. But I guess the thing for me is just learning how to navigate powerlessness. Like I wrote a book this year on recovery and the 12 steps and so we think about the first steps. I admit that I'm powerless over my anxiety. This was my prayer life today. I was like, I'm powerless over my fear. Like I am powerless over and learning how to not to give up, but how to give in. Like I don't want to be a person who gives up, but rather a person spiritually who gives in. And I don't think I've got it mastered, but I feel like I'm in one of those weird spiritual places these days where I'm at that point of weariness where something's going to change, but I can't make it change. I'm just ready for something to change. And so what better person to talk to right now than a 6, right?
One of the other things that I think ties in that I learned about at the farm is, yeah, you fail, right? I failed a lot at the farm. But there are also always second, third, and fourth chances.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
There are things that I didn't know how to grow. We had never, for instance, planted daikon radish at the farm before. So we just tried it, right? And we planted the seeds and we waited. It didn't grow the way it was supposed to go. Because with the daikon, usually what you want is a big, fat root. That's what Chinese people cook. We make daikon cakes. We stew the radish with beef. All I got was leaves. It was a failure, allegedly, right? And then I Googled because, what does an unskilled farmhand do? You Google. And I learned that you can eat the flowers and the leaves. And those flowers, which are little and white and slightly purple, they taste like radish. Well, what happens after the flower comes out? It produces seed. Second chances. Right? Second chances are written into nature. And that went a long way toward addressing my fears of powerlessness, right? My desire to know how to do things, to realize, wait, in this failure, there's an invitation to try again. And so the second season, we planted the seeds that we had harvested after my first failure. I think that has helped reorient me a little bit, such that even the worst case scenarios that I plan for now have a postscript to them where I might be able to find a seed of possibility so that I don't just end in a pile of debris.
Any other
Nice.
parallels between tending soil and tending your faith like that?
It takes time and patience. You can't rush it. Crops aren't going to grow faster because you want to eat them sooner. One of my favorite stories in scripture was when Jesus was hungry and really wanted figs, and the fig tree's like, nope. And it's one of the most human depictions of Jesus, right? He wants out of season fruit. We get out of season fruit now because someone else is underpaid to deliver them to the supermarket. But when you're trying to grow your own food, there's no rushing a tomato. It's not going to be sweeter for you in June just because you feel like eating it. That's a kind of humility that I have really learned to appreciate. Also, understanding how much effort goes into producing what we have. The interdependence, the interconnectedness, those usually invisible relationships we actually have with farmers. I think this is where it taps into the 6's desire for trust and loyalty, right?
Yes.
To recognize that I am part of a system in a good way that keeps me alive, that my flourishing is dependent on others doing good work, to be grateful for others who have skills that I don't. I'm really lucky my husband and I don't depend on me to grow food.
Mm-hmm.
But that I can grow a little bit of it makes me really appreciate the farmers I meet at the farmers market and the truck drivers who deliver seafood to Michigan, right? That interconnectedness to realize, wow, my survival is enabled by so many folks I don't even know.
Yeah.
I've become really grateful for that.
Jeff, we oftentimes say that the antidotal virtue for 6's, if their deadly sin is fear, then the virtue that offsets that is faith. Just in this conversation, I was thinking that's probably not a very good term. Faith to me just seems to be a little, for example, I would say a recent observation about myself is that I have a lot of faith, but not a lot of trust, which is weird to say because we think that they're synonymous, but I think they're very, very different things, faith and trust, right? I have a lot of strong faith in God, but practically, boots on the ground. When it comes to trust, not so much. Do you know what I mean? In other words, it's a weird thing. So as a 6, I'm wondering that if what you like, how have you learned to live as a person of trust in the world? Like, you know what I
know
mean?
that I
Like,
have.
okay, well, unpack that for me.
I'm
Like,
pretty. I'm still pretty skeptical. I have been wrestling with what the core virtue of the 6 is recently, because I've read some people arguing that it's courage. I've seen other people say it's faith or trust. And I wonder if that's not quite right. For me, I wonder if the virtue is open-heartedness. Because open-heartedness means you move through the world acknowledging that there's risk and danger, but you don't close yourself off. Fear sends me to a place of isolation. I withdraw. I try to do my own research. I have a pretty strong 5 wing. I gather information and data. But I'm still in this kind of cave of my own creation, where I'm trying to find safeguards and contingency plans. Open-heartedness means that I can move through the world without all the contingency plans. Trusting, there is an element of trust here, trusting that there is some sort of safety net to catch me. And for me, that safety net is a combination of God, but God can feel really distant sometimes. Friends, my husband, some of the skills that I've managed to accumulate along the way, right? It's this interwoven safety net that I have to remember is there. When I'm in fear, I don't even come out of my cave long enough to need that safety net.
How often are you in fear? Just give me an idea.
Every day. It's degrees, right? It's degrees of fear. Look, putting a book out into the world with very personal stories about coming out and a very conservative Chinese family, and even writing about my marriage a little bit. I have a lot of fear of putting those stories out in the world.
Yeah. Well, I know this feeling.
I write a weekly newsletter about spirituality and food and my culture. I have fear every week when I press send.
Yeah. What is the fear? Is it the fear of what others will think of you? Is it the fear of being too exposed and therefore subject to attack? What's at the core of that fear?
I think the core of the fear for me is being alone, unsupported, not belonging. It's not a mystery to me why I'm a 6. As a queer kid growing up in a very Christian, very Chinese environment, even before I could put language to why I was different, I knew I was different. And when you grow up fearing that you won't find belonging and you won't be supported, fundamentally that you won't be loved, yeah, you're going to have some worries about trusting the world.
Yeah. And yet, let's just put it out there, right? Despite that, I mean, that's the thing. Like the phrase that keeps coming up for me as you're talking is the phrase, and yet. There's something about the phrase, and yet, that always kills me in a good way, right? It's like, yeah, I grew up in this really shitty household, and yet, I was a queer Chinese kid growing up in a conservative Christian family, and yet, here I am writing books, putting it out there, exposing my heart. There's like this weird, kind of gift that comes with it all. Like, why is it that people like us insist on, I don't know, sticking our chins out every day, like putting it on paper, putting it out into the world despite our fears, like our worst anxieties,
I think it is a discipline of open-heartedness. I don't think open-heartedness is just something that happens. You have to try. You have to work on it. You have to tiptoe towards it. I wouldn't say that I'm in the prime of my health every single day, emotionally and mentally, right? But I also don't think I can just think my way there. Sometimes I have to move.
Yes.
Before my heart and mind are feeling it.
Yeah, so in my program of recovery, we talk about there's this mantra that there's a million mantras in my little community, but one of them is you can't think your way toward right action. You have to act your way toward right thinking, right? Like just act, just, you know, stop thinking and just start acting, act your way toward right thinking. And I think there's a,
It makes sense to me.
mm-hmm.
You know, I like to cook. I can't think my way to a successful dish.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even plan my way to a successful dish.
Right.
One of the reasons I love to cook is that the kitchen is one of the places where there's less of a struggle with my core fears and less striving toward the core virtue. I just have to do it. I just have to turn my overactive brain off and try the recipe. Make the stir fry.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. Even my signature dish, fried rice, I remember maybe a year, 18 months ago, I made a batch. I have made fried rice 10,000 times. And my husband said, this is the worst fried rice you've ever made.
What's his type?
I think he doesn't like the Enneagram. He says it's astrology.
That's funny. I love that. Keep going.
A friend of mine has described him as the 9est 9 who ever nined.
Really?
We're not supposed to diagnose other people, though, right?
No, we're not. We're not. But, you know,
But it's a fun game.
It's a fun game. Why not? So what has farming is for you as a 6? What has farming taught you most about God?
There was a conversation I had with Nate Stuckey, my thesis advisor and the director of the Farminary. And I was at a pretty low point towards the end of the grad school program because you have to graduate. You can't stay on the farm as a farmhand forever, especially being paid $9 an hour. And I was really struggling with what would come next. He said, what if you just let? And I said, what do you mean just let go? It's like, what would happen? And I said, I would die. And he really pushed me on what it might look like if I just let go of my constant worrying long enough to take the next step past the farm. And his argument was, there is that safety net that I was talking about earlier. What if you just let go? You're not going to die. And as it turns out, I graduated without a job to go to. There was a period of wandering in the wilderness for my husband and me after a seminary. There's not a huge job market for Gaysians with questionable ordination prospects.
Did you refer to yourself as a Gaysian? Is that what you just...
Gay plus Asian equals Gaysian.
Okay, got it. New word for me. Just wanted to make sure I had it straight.
And it taught me that God does provide. God provides through friends. God provides through loyal spouses. God provides through adventures that you don't expect.
Yes.
God does not provide exactly what you want or what you think you need, but God does provide. And even as I say this to you, I'm shocked that I'm saying it because I'm not that person who talks in those kind of woo-woo ways about God. That was my grandmother, not me. I still bristle when my mom pulls the whole God is in control thing. Because sometimes it can feel like spiritual bypassing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's in a really shitty situation and the earnest Christian comes along and says God is in control. But it feels different looking back at the historical record. And I think maybe that's a part of it.
Mm.
I can look back at the last few years and see those scary moments. And every single time I was met in some way.
Yeah. It's funny, like when I think about my life, when I'm anxious, and I have been anxious lately, like I said, we were just talking about this before we got on the call. There are so many things outside my control right now. A brand new book is out. It's out in the world. It's been out for 6-7 weeks. I've done everything in my God-known power, right? You know this feeling, right? Like, and it's like, I'm still doing everything in my power, but really 98% of this is now well out of my hands, right? Like, I have no control over what happens from here on out. And then there are other things. There are things with my kids. There are things about just things going on, right? Just lots of anxiety in the water. And but then I look back on the record, as you were saying, and I think back over the course of my life. And if I can say anything, it would be that my life has been so blessed by the unexpected kindnesses of many, 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 many people. People who believed in me in ways that I didn't. I didn't know I was supposed to. Showed me how to believe in myself. Showed me how to have enough humility not always to believe in yourself, and yet I can
There's
look back on that
phrase again.
and yet being a bundle of contradictions, I still get up and I worry. Sometimes I wonder what God must think when he listens to my stream of consciousness. You know what I mean? If he does in fact listen to my stream, like he's like, really? Like even now, after all this, you're still worried.
I would guess that for most of us, God has heard the broken record.
Yes.
Like, this again. Here we are.
Yeah. And the only thing I know how to do sometimes is laugh.
Yeah. We're absurd. Right? Humans are absurd, ridiculous creatures.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I do. Even with Anthony and I were just, in fact, when we were getting on, we were just co-bitching about some things. And we just started laughing out loud. And really, that's why we got on the call late. We were just laughing out loud at the absurdity of things. And it felt so good to laugh at just the pent-up energy of anxiety and concern and of course also the drama we turn everything into.
That is a great antidote for fear too, is pausing long enough to recognize how ridiculous I can be. To puncture that balloon that I've blown up and just be like, what the hell was I doing?
Yeah.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah. The thing about fear that I hate, the thing about anxiety that I hate is just how it infects the space in such a way that it chases away joy and gratitude and contentment and all those things, like it just chases. And I know what it's like when I'm in that zone, and it feels so great. It feels so good. And man, fear is a great destroyer. Like
it is.
It's a great destroyer.
So one of the writing exercises that I do sometimes when I'm teaching is I have folks write down their fears. I just give them 30 seconds, right, to scribble down their fears on pieces of paper, and they have to send those up to me. And then on a different piece of paper on an index card, I have them write what their hopes are. Who do you want to be in the world? And I have them hold on to those. I take the fears to the compost pile, like the literal compost pile. And I tell them these fears, which are not of God and are not life-giving, are going to be turned into new soil by processes beyond our understanding and our sight. And our hopes, we get to hold on to those. And the power of writing it down on a piece of paper that you keep in your wallet or your purse is that in those moments where you're a little unhinged and not being who you want to be, you can pull out that piece of paper and say, here are 5 words or phrases that describe who I want to be in the world. And to write them down as opposed to having them float in my mess of a brain has been really helpful to me. To remember that I have to keep sending my fears to a spiritual compost pile. Right? That is going to be the work of my life. And that those fears will be met by whatever the spiritual equivalent of the bacteria and the worms and the water and the air and forces beyond my understanding that will combine to transform them into something good. That's been helpful. And then the other thing is going to the Psalms. To be reminded that I am not the first one to feel devastated. I am not the first one to feel afraid. And in the span of a few verses, you watch the psalmist move from lament to remembering, because it's always about remembering where they've come from and how they've been met, and then ending in a place of hope.
Yes.
And I've had people push back and say, yeah, but I'm not always ready to be moved to a place of hope. Great. Then you have Psalm 88. There is even a psalm that ends in utter devastation and loneliness. And I think it's beautiful that it comes in the middle of the book of Psalms, because then there's also Psalm 89 and Psalm 90 for those days where you are ready to move toward gratitude and hope. But Psalm 88 ends with no resolution, no possibility, just someone alone with their sadness. So there's room for that too.
Yeah.
So the Psalms have been super helpful over the years.
Anthony, it looks like you're going to say something. What were you going to say?
Oh, I just love that. I have been sitting on a little question. Like I wonder what your younger writer, journalist self would be surprised to learn from, your new farmhand self?
If you had told me at 21 that I would be happily married and know anything about working on a farm and have slaughtered a chicken and helped raise goats, I would have laughed in your face and not believed any of it. I was just trying to construct a facade that was presentable to my family, to my bosses, to folks who I thought loved me, so that they would keep loving me. I didn't have the bravery to imagine. And maybe that's my wish for my fellow sixes, that they would have the open-heartedness and courage, even though courage feels like such a big word sometimes, just to imagine, just to dream a little bit without the fear of what could go wrong. Because we can play the what could go wrong thing better than anyone else. How about the imagination piece of it?
Mm-hmm.
Where can you find space to dream?
Good. And follow-up question, are you still wearing khakis?
Yeah.
I mean, there are occasions. We have a community garden plot 3 blocks from our house here in Michigan, and I wear jeans. I wear old, ratty jeans. I have nobody to impress. I'm not afraid.
Well, I want to end on an Enneagram 6 saying, I'm not afraid. I love that. And I want to remind everyone, we've been talking to our friend Jeff Chu, author of the forthcoming memoir, Good Soil, The Education of an Accidental Farmhand. Jeff, when does it drop?
March 25th.
Oh, man, you're 7 days out.
Wow.
7 days to doom.
7 days to doom.
There you go.
7 days to completely and utterly out of control.
I just said I'm not afraid, and then I go to doom. This is the life of the six.
That was quick.
Jeff, it's a delight having you, my friend. We're delighted that you're putting this thing out into the world, and we're always thrilled to have you on the show, learning more about the interior world of Enneagram Sixes. And I'm assuming everyone can find you at jeffchew.com. Let me guess, that's true.
ByJeffChew.com.
By Jeff Chew.
Some other Jeff Chew took jeffchew.com.
B-U-Y?
That would be amazing, though. I should
might want to
see
go
if
grab
it's
that one
available.
Too. Might want to go get that one soon.
Yeah. As I said, everyone has their price. So,
Anthony, great to be with you, my friend.
Same. Good to be with you both.
Good to see
you. And all of you listening, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, and may you have rest. Until next time.